Howdy folks, Matt with BAAM Ranch. Welcome back. So today's video, we're gonna cover part 3. I think it's part 3, not real sure, but we're gonna cover part 3 in our series on the foundational basics of preparedness. Just remember, in the description below, I'm gonna put some timestamps so you can kind of skip around to whichever part interests you the most. So today's video is the food and water portion. And just as a reminder, our 5 foundational categories of preparedness are shelter, food and water, safety and security, financial stability, and transportation. We need to keep these on a somewhat equal level playing field because you get your foundation, one spot's too high, the other spot's too low. We want it to be pretty equal so everything that we've built doesn't just fall down on us. And like I said, today is food and water. We've got some notes written out today because, prepared, right? And also there's going to be all of these foundational videos are going to be in a playlist called Prepper University on my channel. So go ahead and hop over there and watch the rest of these if you haven't watched them yet. And I'll also put a link to them in the description below. One thing that we always focus on here is logistics. We don't want to look at just a particular category, but we want to look at it from a logistics standpoint. Because remember, amateurs talk about gear, professionals talk about logistics. I've got a video on that. Go check that out too. So we need to think about how are we going to resupply what we need? How are we going to access it? How are we going to store it? How are we going to use it? All of these things we need to think at a higher level than just buy food, put on shelf. We need to look at the totality, 30,000 foot view of the situation and see how we can apply that. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So although this is titled and we normally talk about it, we say food and water, this probably should be called water and food simply because water is actually a much higher priority than everything else in this. So the difficult thing about water is it's bulky, it's heavy, it's hard to store, and no matter what you do, you can never have enough water stored to get you past anything other than just a short-term, outage. So we need to think about the logistics of that. How are we going to, put some thought into resupply? Where are we going to get additional water from? How are we going to use it? So start thinking about that in the process of thinking about water. I guess what I would recommend would be, as a starting out phase, you need to have at least a case of water per person. That's not really enough, but it's better than nothing. And once we get to that point, at least we can move on to other things. We need to keep in mind that most survival type stuff recommends a gallon of water per person per day. And that's true as long as you're sitting there doing nothing and all you're trying to do is postpone the dying process until your 72 hours or whatever threshold has run its course and you can either self-rescue, somebody comes and rescues, or you just go ahead and die. In reality, and this can be backed up by a lot of people who've done emergency response to things, you're going to need closer to 5 gallons of water per person per day. All of the food that you're going to cook, all of the sanitation, of the flushing of the toilets, cleaning, doing dishes, all of that stuff is going to take water. So you need to be planning for, in the future, using 5 gallons of water per person per day. So to add to the 1 case per person per day, the 24-pack cases of water that you get at Walmart or Sam's Club or wherever it is that you do your shopping. They also sell the blue. They're about, 1.5 foot cube blue. I think they call them Aqua Pod. I don't remember what they're called, Aquatainer, but they're just a cubed water storage thing. Fill those up. They hold about 5 to 7 gallons depending on what size you get. Go ahead and stack back some of those. That's a pretty good way of doing it. And I'll be honest, as far as inside the house storage, that's pretty much your limit on your climate controlled storage that you can not have to worry about growing algae and keep it from freezing up. That's just about the limit of what you're going to be able to store in a climate controlled environment. So what about the resupply of that? Well, there's countless ways of doing this. Rainwater harvesting has always been real popular. It's becoming more popular, and you might check it out because depending on the state that you live in, you could get a tax break for at least a portion of that, and even grant money to help pay for the installation of that. You've seen in my past videos, we have about a 3-acre pond on our family's property. And that's a luxury that not everybody is able to have, and I'm lucky that we're able to have that. It pretty well maintains itself regardless of the time of year. But if for some reason that were to fail, we need to look at things like, do you have a well? Can you power that well without the grid? We have one well that's entirely solar powered, absolutely independent of anything else. It runs into a storage tank. The storage tank overflows into a stock tank, and the stock tank overflows into the pond. So that's one way of looking at things. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time here on the water because it's fairly simple. It's just hard to implement in some ways, but it doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. One thing to keep in mind is you may have emergencies that require water, such as if the fire department can't get to you and something's on fire, or you're way out in the country and there's no water available. A fire truck can only carry, a couple 100 gallons of water in the best of scenarios. And there's a high chance that if there's 5 houses on fire, they've got a limited amount of water that they can carry with them, but you've got, tens of thousands of gallons of, in a swimming pool or a pond or storage tank or something like that. Be sure and call the county and let them know that you have water that they can access if needed. There's no way that that's going to work out bad for you in any situation. It's good to help your neighbors out, give them some access to water, and if something happens to your property, that very well could be the thing that gets your property put a little bit higher on that priority list. So let's move on to food. So the logistics of food. We have to remember we need to try as hard as we can to be our own resupply. We can store food, different food stores for different amount of times, and then once we run out, we have to be able to resupply it. That's normally through agriculture. So we're going to store as much food as we can to give us time to spin up our agriculture. If this happens, right in planting season, as luck would have it, in 90 days, we're going to have some food coming out of the garden. But what if this happens in late October? And we get an early winter coming on. We're not going to be harvesting a whole bunch of stuff out of the garden at that point. Aside from gardening, we need to look at livestock. That's some way that we can resupply as well. So let's move on from that and go to storage of food. Food storage, in my mind, can be broken up into 3 different categories. That's your short-term storage, your medium or mid-term storage, and your long-term storage. Short-term, the best words. Short-term storage, to me, is what I can keep in the refrigerator and freezer. And as long as I can keep that going, if something happens, we're going to start clearing out that stuff as soon as possible. We're going to be firing up the grill, and we're going to be cooking everything that may spoil. We're going to be eating tons of bowls of cereal. Anything that's going to spoil, we're going to get rid of that first. I don't know if really that should be considered food storage, but your short-term stuff, you need to aim to try to get, up to 2 weeks. Can you get 2 weeks by on your perishable food storage? After the perishable storage becomes our pantry storage, which this is going to be our, midterm stuff. This is the rotating pantry that you work out of. This is the stuff that you eat, rotate, and replace on a weekly or monthly, on a regular basis of some kind. This is stuff that you already eat, and you're going to be consuming it. This could be considered anywhere from that 0 to 3 months, 6 months. And some of this can actually even be pushed out to a year or more in your midterm storage, which is your pantry stuff. Long-term storage, this is the stuff that goes into Mylar bags and 5-gallon buckets. This is your freeze-dried stuff, and this is your MREs. So what are my thoughts on just going and buying a whole pallet of MREs and freeze-dried Mountain House or whatever company, survival supply company you choose? They have their place. Keep in mind, MREs were never intended to be a long-term food item, and you're not going to do well if that's all you're eating for weeks and weeks on end. Freeze-dried definitely has its place, just the same as MREs. They're extremely portable, but the problem with the freeze-dried stuff is it's incredibly expensive. Most of the kits that you buy are filled with rice, freeze-dried rice. Why are we buying freeze-dried rice? Rice is super cheap and it stores for 25, 30 years or even longer. And why are we spending that extra money? So the MREs and freeze-dried meals are exorbitantly expensive. Maybe if you want to get some cheese or some other comfort item like that, go for it. They have their place, but not necessarily a priority. So with your pantry stuff, your rotating pantry, your working pantry, what is the easiest way to get, up to a year's supply of food out of that? There's several different methods of thought on this. The one that I like the best, I got from the Bear Independent YouTube channel. He gets credit for this. This is not something that I thought of. But what they recommend is to pick 7 meals that are relatively easy to cook. And I'm not going to give you all of them. You need to think about what your family eats. But think chili mac, think spaghetti and meat sauce, canned chicken chili, 7 meals that are relatively easy to prepare. Basically dump in pot, heat up, boil water, make food. And then as those go on sale, buy 52 of them. So whenever spaghetti goes on sale for $1 a pack, boom, I just buy a whole bunch of it. I buy 30 of it. With the meat sauce, I go to Sam's Club and I get one of the bulk packs of the meat sauce, Alfredo sauce, pick whichever you want. And then boom, just like that, I've got 12 weeks worth of the food that we're going to have on Tuesdays. Go through and do that with all of these. It's incredibly easy, relatively inexpensive, and it's meals that you already know that your family eats. It's meals that everybody in the house can prepare, and it's pretty easy to keep track of that way too. Now, do I recommend going out straight right off the bat and buying a whole year's worth of this stuff? Well, not necessarily. Like I said, in our foundational stuff, we need to at least have some stop points to make sure that the rest of our plan has kind of caught back up and we're not getting too out of balance. So I would probably plan to buy 30 days worth of food and then stop and look at everything else. Are we going broke? Is the roof falling in on the house? How does our shelter, food, water, safety, security, financial stability, and transportation looking? Make sure all of those are kind of caught back up mostly to the 30-day level, and then move to 90 days. At 90 days, you are far ahead of the majority of the population, even those that, consider themselves to be in the preparedness community. Bump that on up to 6 months, then stop and take another look at things, and a year. I don't know if I would go much past a year with this, because the purpose of our food storage is to be able to ramp up our agriculture. And these are pantry items, so they're gonna spoil, they're gonna go bad after a while. And after a year, you start running into, storage items, storage issues with these items. So what about the long-term storage? Long-term is, for one, it's generally a lot less expensive, a lot more compact, and it's kind of a one and done thing for the most part. There's several different methodologies on this. You can look at the LDS, the Latter-day Saints, and see how they do theirs. James Wesley Rawls, author of the book How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It, he has some pretty good baseline stuff of what to store. I'm going to go back to the Bear Independent channel. I really like the plans that he has laid out, and I really encourage you to go check his out to really get solid, good information on this particular subject, because there's no need in me just explaining what he lays out so clearly. So what he recommends is 750 pounds of grain per person per year. That works out to like, it's somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 calories per person per day, which is calculated based on a military age male involved in strenuous activity to maintain his current weight and not lose muscle mass. And that's what that works out to. Now, with that, you're going to have to add things like you're probably going to need some powdered milk, sugar, you're going to need oils, you're going to have to, supply that with some meat or something like that. And with these, you think vegetable beef stew for one of your 7 meals plans. What can make 1 meal of vegetable beef stew into 2 meals of vegetable beef stew? Well, it's 2 different grains that are added with each meal. The grains in specific that he recommends, and I guess I probably do too, are beans, rice, whole winter red wheat berries, and whole dried corn. Just regular old feed corn, that's all you need. Vegetable beef stew, pour it over some rice, good to go. Running a little low on chili, need to make 2 meals out of this can of Wolf brand chili, add some beans and rice to it. It's an excellent extender, for your 7 meals plan. I think FEMA also has some good resources on food storage as well. Go check them out. They're actually not a bad resource for a lot of this stuff. And whenever you realize the United States government has been trying to tell us to do these things for as long as, time itself, that really should be a clue that we need to get started on this. Okay, so that's our storage stuff. Now we need to think about our resupply, our agriculture. We're talking, fruits and vegetables and stuff like that that comes out of a garden. We're talking meat. This could be rabbit, chicken, quail. And if you haven't experienced quail are an amazing animal. I don't know why it's so overlooked. So much easier to take care of than chickens. You can take care of them in just a tiny space. It doesn't take hardly any food. They just barely sip the water. They give you eggs, they give you meat, they give you enough to eat without being wasteful. So you might look into quail. Chickens, to me, chickens are primarily egg layers. Now, with that being said, there are going to be cull birds that you're going to have to cull. 2 years or so is about the limit of whenever chickens are in their peak of laying eggs. So after that, it's a good idea to go ahead and cull those birds. And at that point, they're not so old that the meat is just terrible. Rabbits. Rabbits are an excellent meat source. It's a little lean on fat, so you'll need to supplement it with some kind of fat from somewhere. But rabbits are an excellent source. Turkeys are wonderful. They're absolutely stupid. Domestic turkeys, anything other than a wild turkey, cannot survive without human intervention. They will kill themselves in just about any scenario. You can't hardly breed them. Are they wonderful to have? Are they cool to have? Yeah, if you've got them, keep them. Nothing wrong with that. We can still be friends if you have turkeys, but I wouldn't expect that to, be part of a resupply. And when looking at this agricultural stuff, we also need to, how are we going to preserve this? We can't grow a garden, in February whenever it's minus 12 degrees outside. So, pressure canning, pickling, those are some skills that we need to pick up. Then we look at, meat. There's stored canned meat, and then there's fresh meat. You know, live food never spoils. So take a look at that, you know, and develop a plan on how you want to do that. Your pressure canning today may involve you just found a whole bunch of some kind of meat that you enjoy on sale, and you buy a whole bunch of it. You know, divide out a couple of meals, and then the rest of that you can save it for later. If you're a hunter, you know, canned chicken, canned duck, it's all cannibalism. But chicken, duck, rabbit, if you do any kind of hunting at all, that would be the perfect opportunity to take some of that extra meat and learn to preserve it in, you know, any way you see fit. As far as large livestock, you know, cows, pigs, that's not really in the scope of this video. Sheep, maybe. They're pretty easy to take care of, pretty easy to butcher. But some of that larger livestock, maybe we can discuss that a little deeper, take a deep dive into that in the future. It's not really gonna fit much in this quick little video. So do me a favor. If you got any value at all from this video, hit the like button. It really does help the YouTube algorithm. And not just for my channel, but do that for anybody else's channel as well. I encourage you to subscribe. Like I said, all of this is going to be put in a playlist called Prepper University. You'll be able to find it, go back and reference it. And if you haven't seen those videos yet, go ahead and click on over there and take a look at those. Well, anyway, until next time, you guys be safe.